The foreclosure notice had been taped to Marcus Chen's apartment door for 3 days, before he finally worked up the courage to read it. 30 days, to vacate, the words blurred as he stared at them. His 8-year-old son Daniel sleeping in the bedroom behind him, blissfully unaware that their world was about to collapse again. It had been 14 months since the accident. 14 months since Sarah's car had hydroplaned on that rain-slicked highway. 14 months of learning to be both mother and father, to a boy who still sometimes called out for her in his sleep. And now this. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The final humiliation in a string of failures that seemed determined to break him completely. Marcus was a software engineer, or had been before the grief made concentration impossible, before the medical bills from Sarah's final weeks devoured their savings, before missing too many deadlines cost him the job he'd held for 6 years. Now he worked 3 part-time positions, none with benefits, none paying enough to cover rent in Seattle's impossibly expensive housing market. The eviction notice felt like the universe's final judgment on his inadequacy as a provider. He sat at their small kitchen table, laptop open to Craigslist, searching for apartments they could afford. The options were grim. Studio apartments in dangerous neighborhoods, rooms in shared houses with strangers, places so far from Daniel's school that the commute would consume what little time they had together. Each listing felt like another compromise, another way he was failing his son. That's when he saw it. Buried deep in the real estate listings where desperation met opportunity. Historic airport hangar, Spokane County. Minimal restoration. $1 reserve auction. No minimum bid. Property sold as is. Viewing by appointment only. The photographs showed a massive corrugated steel structure. Paint peeling. Roof sections missing. Surrounded by cracked tarmac and weeds. It looked less like a building and more like a monument to abandonment. But the listing included a small attached office space, 2 rooms plus a bathroom. Technically livable, if you were desperate enough. Marcus was desperate enough. The auction was in 3 days. He had exactly $1,247 in his checking account, the remnants of his final paycheck, and the coins he'd been collecting from sofa cushions and car cup holders. If he could win the hangar for under $1,000, they'd have a roof over their heads. It wouldn't be much, but it would be theirs. No landlord, no eviction notices, just a chance to catch their breath and figure out what came next. "Dad?" Daniel appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His mother's eyes, the same warm brown that Marcus saw in every photograph. "Why are you still awake?" Marcus closed the laptop quickly, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. "Just working on some things, buddy. Go back to bed." But Daniel, perceptive in the way children of tragedy often become, moved closer. His small hand touched the foreclosure notice that Marcus had been too shell-shocked to hide. "What's this?" There was no point in lying. Sarah had always believed in honesty with their son, age-appropriate but truthful. Marcus took a breath. "We have to move, Daniel. This apartment is too expensive, and Dad's having trouble keeping up with the rent. Where are we going to go?" The question hung in the air, weighted with all the uncertainty of their last year. Marcus pulled his son onto his lap, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and innocence. "I'm working on that. I found a place. It's different from here. Definitely an adventure. But it'll be ours. No one can take it away from us." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, with the resilience that broke Marcus's heart daily, he said, "Mom always liked adventures." "She did," Marcus whispered, his throat tight. "She really did." The auction took place on a gray Tuesday morning in a county office building 3 hours east of Seattle. Marcus had taken the day off from all 3 jobs, a luxury he couldn't afford, but couldn't avoid. Daniel sat beside him in the auction room, a space that smelled of old coffee and government bureaucracy. swinging his legs and playing quietly on Marcus's phone. The hangar was lot #47, buried between foreclosed homes and abandoned commercial properties. When it came up for bidding, the auctioneer's voice held barely concealed contempt. Historic airport hangar, Spokane County. Structure is in severe disrepair. No utilities connected. Buyer responsible for all code compliance and environmental remediation. We'll start the bidding at $1. The room was silent. Marcus raised his hand, his number card trembling slightly. We have $1. Do I hear 5? Nothing. The other bidders, mostly investors and house flippers, had clearly done their homework. The hangar was a money pit, an expensive problem, masquerading as a property, going once at $1. The auctioneer scanned the room with professional skepticism. Going twice. $2. The voice came from the back, sharp with mockery. A man in an expensive suit, grey hair slicked back, his expression amused. Let's make this interesting. Marcus's stomach dropped. He raised his hand again. $5. 10. The man counted immediately, his smile widening. The bidding continued. A ridiculous dance that drew snickers from the other attendees. $20. 50. 100. Each time Marcus bid, the man in the suit would counter, not because he wanted the property, Marcus realized, but because he enjoyed the sport of it. He was playing with Marcus the way a cat plays with a mouse before the kill. At $850, Marcus hesitated. The man raised his paddle instantly. 900. This was it. If Marcus bid again and won, he'd have almost nothing left for moving expenses, for gas, for food. But if he didn't bid, they'd be homeless in 30 days. $950, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. The man in the suit studied him for a long moment, then shrugged and lowered his paddle. All yours, friend. You'll need more than that to make that dump livable. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder #23 for $950. In the parking lot, after signing the paperwork, Marcus sat in his 10-year-old Honda with Daniel staring at the deed that made them property owners. The man in the suit walked past, pausing to tap on Marcus's window with a manicured finger. Marcus rolled it down warily. Marcus Chen, the man read from a business card, handing it through the window. Thomas Whitmore. Whitmore Development. I'm curious, do you actually plan to do something with that hangar? Or did you just buy yourself an expensive problem? We're going to live there, Marcus said, his jaw tight. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. Live there? With a child? He glanced at Daniel, then back at Marcus, with something between pity and contempt. That structure isn't fit for habitation. No power, no water. Structural integrity questionable at best. You'd be better off selling it to me right now. I'll give you $1,500. That's a quick profit. It's not for sale. $2,000. Whitmore's tone sharpened. That's more than double what you paid. Still not for sale. Whitmore's expression hardened. Suit yourself. But when you're freezing in that metal box come winter, when your son gets sick from living in squalor, remember I offered you a way out. He walked away, calling over his shoulder. I'll be waiting for your call, Mr. Chen. They always call eventually. The 3-hour drive to Spokane County gave Marcus plenty of time to question every decision that had led to this moment. Daniel, sensing his father's anxiety, chattered about school and friends, filling the silence with a kind of normalcy that felt increasingly precious. When they finally turned onto the access road leading to the hangar, even Marcus's minimal expectations weren't prepared for the reality. The structure was enormous, easily capable of housing multiple aircraft. Its curved roof section missing panels like broken teeth, weeds pushed through cracks in the tarmac. The small office attachment looked only marginally more stable than the hangar itself. Wow, Daniel breathed, pressing his face against the window. It's huge. Marcus parked in front of the office door, the key from the auction heavy in his pocket. As they stepped out of the car, the wind carried the smell of rust and abandonment. If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. In the distance, the remains of a runway stretched toward empty fields, a ghost of the airport's more functional past. The office door resisted, swollen with age and moisture, before finally giving way. Inside, dust lay thick enough to show their footprints. 2 rooms, as promised, one larger space that might serve as a combined living and sleeping area, and a smaller room with a rust-stained sink and a toilet that Marcus prayed still worked. The walls were water-damaged, the windows cracked, but it was shelter, barely. "This is going to be our house?" Daniel's voice was small, uncertain. Marcus knelt beside his son, forcing confidence he didn't feel. "This is going to be our home. I know it doesn't look like much yet, but we'll fix it up. Make it ours. What do you think? Want to explore the hangar?" The massive sliding door that separated the office from the hangar proper took both of them to move, Marcus pulling while Daniel pushed with all his 8-year-old strength. It gave way gradually, revealing the cavernous space beyond. The hangar was even larger inside than it appeared from outside. Afternoon light streamed through gaps in the roof, creating dusty columns of illumination. The concrete floor was cracked, but mostly intact, and everywhere, scattered like the detritus of forgotten dreams, lay the remnants of aviation history. Old engine parts, wing sections, tools rusted beyond recognition. "Cool!" Daniel ran forward, his earlier uncertainty forgotten in the excitement of exploration. "Dad, look at this." Over the next hour, they discovered a dozen relics: a propeller blade, bent and corroded, faded photographs pinned to a bulletin board showing the hangar in its glory days, planes lined up on the tarmac, a logbook with entries dating back to 1952. Each find told the story of a place that had once mattered, that had housed aircraft and mechanics, that had been part of something larger before being left to decay. As the sun began to set, painting the hangar's interior in shades of gold and amber, Marcus and Daniel sat on the floor of their new office space, eating sandwiches from a gas station they'd passed 20 miles back. The building creaked and settled around them, unfamiliar sounds that would become their new normal. "Dad," Daniel said through a mouthful of peanut butter, "do you think Mom would like this place?" The question pierced Marcus's heart. "Your mom," he said, carefully, "loved adventures. And she loved us. So, yes, I think she'd like that we're brave enough to try something different. Even though everyone thinks we're crazy." Marcus looked at his son, seeing Sarah's strength reflected in his young face. "Especially because they think we're crazy. Sometimes the best things are the ones other people can't see the value in." That night, they slept in sleeping bags on the office floor, the building's strange noises keeping Marcus awake long after Daniel had drifted off. He lay in the darkness, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or if, somehow, this impossible choice might save them. Outside, the wind whistled through the broken hangar, carrying secrets that had been locked away for decades, waiting for someone desperate enough or foolish enough to discover them. In Seattle, news of Marcus's purchase spread quickly through their former neighborhood. His mother called, her voice tight with disapproval. His brother sent texts alternating between concern and criticism. Friends from his old job reached out with thinly veiled pity. Even Daniel's school contacted him, questioning whether the new living situation was appropriate for a child. "You bought a what?" "One," his mother demanded during their third phone call that week. "Marcus, honey, this isn't healthy. You're not thinking clearly. Come home. Stay with me until you get back on your feet." But going back meant admitting defeat, meant accepting that he couldn't provide for his own son, meant living under his mother's well-intentioned but suffocating oversight. "We're fine, Mom. It's an adjustment, but we're making it work." A child living in a hangar, Marcus. Do you hear yourself? What would Sarah think? The invocation of his dead wife was meant to shame him. Instead, it strengthened his resolve. Sarah would have understood. She'd been the one who always saw possibilities where others saw only problems. She'd been the one who encouraged him to take risks, to trust his instincts. This move, crazy as it seemed, felt more aligned with her spirit than anything he'd done in the 14 months since her death. The first week in the hangar tested them in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. The office bathroom did work, barely, though the water came out rust-brown for several minutes before running clear. They had no heat beyond a small electric space heater, running off a generator he'd bought used. Cooking meant a camping stove. Showering meant the gym membership Marcus maintained specifically for that purpose. A 25-mile drive each way. Daniel adapted better than Marcus expected. He treated their situation like an extended camping trip, finding adventure in the inconvenience. He made a fort in one corner of the office, using cardboard boxes and sleeping bags. He explored the hangar daily, returning with treasures: a perfectly preserved altimeter, a leather flight jacket, so stiff with age it could stand on its own, a metal lunchbox, with someone's name scratched into the paint. But the judgment from their old life continued. Daniel came home from school with stories about classmates asking if they really lived in a junkyard. Marcus overheard other parents at pickup whispering about neglect and child services. The school counselor requested a meeting to discuss Daniel's home environment. The meeting was excruciating. The counselor, Miss Patterson, sat across from Marcus with Daniel's file open, her expression a careful mask of professional concern. "Mr. Chen, I want to start by saying, we're not questioning your love for Daniel, but we have to consider what's in his best interest. He has a roof over his head, food to eat, and he's in school every day," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level. "What exactly is the concern?" Miss Patterson chose her words carefully. "Living in an unheated hangar isn't a sustainable situation for a child, especially as winter approaches. We worry about the psychological impact of such instability after the trauma of losing his mother. My son is fine, better than fine. He's resilient, creative, and he's learning that sometimes life requires unconventional solutions. Be that as it may." "Are you threatening to involve Child Protective Services?" Marcus interrupted, the fear he'd been suppressing finally surfacing as anger. "We're not threatening anything, Mr. Chen. We're expressing concern. If you could show us a concrete plan for improving your living situation, it would go a long way toward alleviating those concerns." Marcus left the meeting with a sick feeling in his stomach. He'd escaped eviction only to face a different kind of dispossession. That evening, he sat in the hangar office, researching winterization strategies he couldn't afford and housing assistance programs he didn't qualify for, feeling the walls of his choices closing in. Daniel found him there after finishing his homework, curling up beside his father on their salvaged couch. "Are they going to take me away?" "No," Marcus said firmly, pulling his son close. "No one is taking you anywhere. We're going to figure this out. I like it here, Dad. I know it's weird, but I like it. It's ours." The simple statement clarified everything. They had a choice: spend their limited resources trying to make the office space conventionally livable to satisfy others' expectations, or embrace what they'd chosen and make it work on their own terms. Marcus chose the latter. He spent the next 3 weeks systematically sealing and insulating the office space. He covered cracks with foam, hung heavy blankets over windows for additional insulation, and created a sleeping loft for Daniel, using lumber he salvaged from the hangar. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. The space heater now maintained a tolerable temperature. They had light, water, and enough comfort to survive. More importantly, Marcus began exploring the hangar itself more methodically. The building's history fascinated him. During his evening research, he discovered it had been part of a small regional airport that operated from 1947 to 1978, providing flight training and charter services before changing economics forced its closure. The hangar had been used for storage afterward, then abandoned completely in the early 1992. One evening, while Daniel worked on homework, Marcus ventured deeper into the hangar than they'd previously explored. At the far end, behind stacks of old crates, and beneath a massive tarp, he found something that made him stop breathing. The shape beneath the tarp was unmistakable, the distinctive silhouette of an aircraft. His hands trembled as he lifted the edge of the canvas, revealing gleaming metal beneath. Not just any aircraft, a vintage plane that, even in the dim light, appeared remarkably well preserved. "Daniel!" His voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Daniel, come here!" His son appeared moments later, eyes widening at the sight. Together, they pulled back the tarp, completely, revealing not one but two aircraft, both carefully covered, both in apparent pristine condition. The first was a classic Cessna, its silver body reflecting the light from Marcus's flashlight. The second, partially visible behind it, appeared to be something older, a biplane with fabric-covered wings and wire struts. Marcus's mind raced. Even in his limited knowledge of aviation, he knew vintage aircraft had value, especially well-maintained examples. These planes alone might be worth tens of thousands of dollars, but something nagged at him. A question of why aircraft this valuable would be left abandoned in a hangar that sold for less than $1,000. Over the next few days, Marcus photographed the planes and began researching their potential value. The Cessna appeared to be a 1952 model, worth perhaps $30,000 in good condition. The biplane was harder to identify, its markings faded, but potentially more valuable as a genuine antique. He contacted several aircraft salvage yards, sending photos and descriptions, expecting modest offers. Instead, he received responses that made his hands shake as he read them. The Cessna alone was worth more than he'd estimated, but the biplane had elicited excitement that transcended mere monetary interest. One collector called him directly, "Mr. Chen, if your photographs are accurate, you may have a 1928 Travel Air in almost original condition. There are fewer than a dozen known survivors. Would you be willing to allow an appraisal?" The appraiser arrived 3 days later. A woman in her 60s named Janet Morrison who'd spent 40 years in aviation history. She walked around the biplane with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral, her gloved hands touching the fabric wings with infinite gentleness. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's authentic. Original fabric, original engine." She turned to Marcus, her eyes bright with tears. "Do you have any idea what you have here?" The man on the phone mentioned it was rare. "Rare," Janet laughed, the sound holding wonder and disbelief. "Mr. Chen, this aircraft in this condition is worth at minimum $250,000, possibly more if we can authenticate its provenance." The number didn't compute. Marcus heard the words, but they refused to connect to reality. "That can't be right." "I assure you it is. And that's just the biplane. The Cessna is worth another $40,000 to $50,000. Together, you're looking at $300,000, conservatively." Daniel, who'd been watching from a distance, ran forward. "Dad, does that mean we're rich?" Janet smiled at him. "It means you have assets, young man. What you do with them is what determines everything else." After Janet left, promising to return with authentication documents and potential buyer contacts, Marcus sat on the hangar floor with Daniel, staring at the planes they'd discovered. $300,000 would solve everything. Pay off medical debt, get them into decent housing, maybe even allow him to go back to school or start a business. But as he looked around the hangar, at this space that had become theirs, at Daniel's face bright with excitement, he wondered if selling immediately was the right choice. They'd been judged, mocked, and dismissed since the day he bought this property. Everyone had been so certain he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Proving them wrong suddenly seemed more important than any amount of money. The news of the aircraft discovery spread through Spokane County faster than Marcus could have imagined. Suddenly, The man who'd been mocked for buying a junkyard was the subject of fascinated speculation. How much were the planes worth? Had he known they were there? Would he sell? Calls started coming in, first from Janet Morrison's contacts in the aviation collector community, then from local media wanting to do stories on the incredible find, finally from lawyers and business consultants offering their services. Marcus fielded each one with growing confusion, unprepared for the sudden attention. Thomas Whitmore called on a Tuesday morning, his voice warm with false friendliness. "Mr. Chen, I heard about your discovery. Quite remarkable. I'm calling to renew my offer to purchase the property. Given the new circumstances, I'm prepared to offer you $400,000 for the hangar and its contents. That's less than the planes are worth by themselves," Marcus said, his understanding of negotiations suddenly crystallizing. A pause. "The appraisals you've received are likely optimistic. Factor in the cost of restoration, authentication, finding buyers. The reality is always less glamorous than the initial numbers suggest. My offer provides immediate liquidity without the headaches. Thank you. But we're not selling. Mr. Chen, be reasonable. A week ago you were living in squalor with your son. Now you have an opportunity to provide him with stability, proper housing, a normal childhood. Don't let pride," Marcus ended the call. But Whitmore's words haunted him. Was he being selfish, holding onto the hangar out of stubborn pride, when Daniel deserved better? That evening, he asked his son directly, "Daniel, if we could sell those planes and get a nice house, go back to Seattle, would you want that?" Daniel considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Would we still have the hangar? No, we'd have to sell everything." "Then, no." Daniel's certainty surprised Marcus. "Dad, I like it here. I like that it's ours, that we discovered something no one else knew about. And besides," he added with 8-year-old wisdom, "Mom always said the best treasures are the ones you have to work hard to see." Sarah had said that, usually while pointing out beauty in unexpected places. A flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk, the pattern of rust on an old bridge, the way light caught broken glass. She'd trained them both to look beyond the entries, obvious, to find value in what others dismissed. Marcus made his decision that night. They wouldn't sell the planes immediately. First, they would restore the hangar itself, turn it into a space worthy of housing such treasures. He would document the aircraft properly, have them authenticated, understand their history. Only then would they decide what came next. The next few weeks brought a routine that, while far from conventional, gave them structure. Marcus worked his part-time jobs, saved every spare dollar, and spent evenings researching hangar restoration and aircraft preservation. Daniel helped with age-appropriate tasks, cleaning and organizing the space, creating an inventory of the parts and equipment they'd found. But the attention their discovery had attracted brought complications. People began showing up unannounced, photographers trying to get pictures of the planes, aviation enthusiasts hoping for a glimpse, even random curiosity seekers treating their home like a tourist attraction. Marcus installed a gate and posted "No trespassing" signs, but the intrusions continued. More concerning were the nighttime visitors. Twice, Marcus woke to the sound of someone trying to enter the hangar through side doors. Once, he found evidence that someone had attempted to remove panels from the roof, presumably to gain access to the aircraft. After the second incident, he invested in a serious security system he could barely afford, cameras and motion sensors that turned his phone into a constant stream of alerts. The school counselor called again. Miss Patterson's tone had shifted from concern to barely concealed accusation. "Mr. Chen, there are rumors that you've discovered valuable aircraft on your property. If that's true, it raises questions about your financial representations. I bought the property for $950. The aircraft were an unexpected discovery. Neither changes my financial situation significantly at this moment, but potentially changes nothing. My son continues to attend school regularly. His grades are good, and he's safe and cared for. If you have specific concerns about neglect or abuse, please share them. Otherwise, I'd appreciate the presumption that I'm capable of making decisions about my own child's welfare." After hanging up, Marcus felt the weight of judgment from every direction. His mother thought he was being stubborn. His former friends thought he was crazy. The school thought he was neglectful. Even well-meaning people couldn't understand why he didn't just sell everything and return to conventional life. Only Daniel and a handful of others truly saw what he was building. Janet Morrison became an unexpected ally, visiting regularly to help with authentication and sharing contacts in the aviation preservation community. A local mechanic named Ray, himself a vintage aircraft enthusiast, began stopping by to offer advice and occasionally parts he had lying around. Most surprising was the support from other parents in the community who'd also felt judged for unconventional choices. A single mother who worked 3 jobs and lived in a converted garage, a couple raising their grandchildren in an RV while saving for a house, a family who'd moved into a storage unit after job loss. They recognized in Marcus and Daniel a reflection of their own struggles and refusal to accept society's verdict on their worth. 3 months after discovering the aircraft, Marcus received the official authentication documents from Janet Morrison's team. The biplane was indeed a 1928 Travel Air, one of only 11 known surviving examples. And more significantly, it had been owned by a pioneering female aviator named Catherine "Kit" Bradford, who'd set multiple altitude records in the 1,930 seconds before disappearing during a transcontinental flight attempt in 1937. The Cessna, while less historically significant, was a rare variant produced for only 2 years and in nearly top-perfect original condition. Together, the authenticated aircraft were now valued at closer to $450,000, potentially more to the right buyer. But Janet brought even more significant news. Marcus, while researching the hangar's history for the aircraft documentation, I discovered something interesting. This property was owned by the Bradford family until 1968, when Catherine's sister Eleanor sold it. There are references in Eleanor's correspondence to a family collection stored in the hangar, but no specific inventory. She handed him a photocopy of a letter, yellowed with age. In careful cursive, Eleanor Bradford had written to a friend, "I've decided to sell the hangar. Kit's things are properly stored there, and whoever buys the place will have the responsibility of them. I can't bear to sort through her treasures any longer. Each item reminds me of all she might have accomplished." "Kit's things," Marcus read aloud. "What does that mean beyond the aircraft?" Janet's expression was carefully neutral, but excitement flickered in her eyes. "That's what I think we need to find out." The systematic search of the hangar began the next weekend. Marcus, Daniel, Janet, and Ray worked section by section, cataloging every item, every crate, every piece of equipment. Most of what they found was exactly what it appeared to be: old parts, maintenance equipment, the accumulated debris of decades. But in a locked storage room they'd initially assumed was a utility closet, behind a false wall that Ray discovered by accident, they found what Eleanor Bradford had been unable to face. The room was climate-controlled, powered by a separate electrical system that had somehow continued functioning for decades. Inside, carefully preserved in archival containers, was Catherine Bradford's complete collection. Not just memorabilia from her flying career, though there was plenty of that. Flight logs, photographs, medals, newspaper clippings, but also art she'd collected during her travels: paintings, sculptures, Native American artifacts, Asian ceramics, pieces acquired during the 1,920 seconds and 30 seconds when she'd flown around the world multiple times, trading her services as a pilot for cultural treasures. Marcus stood in that hidden room, surrounded by items he couldn't begin to evaluate, and felt the floor shift beneath him. "Janet," he said carefully, "what are we looking at here?" Janet was examining a painting, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm not an art expert, Marcus, but if this signature is real, if this is an authentic Charles Russell, we're not talking about thousands, we're talking about millions." Over the next week, they carefully photographed and documented everything in the hidden room without removing any items or disturbing the storage conditions. Janet contacted colleagues, art historians, and appraisers who specialized in early 20th century collections. Each response escalated the situation further. The Charles Russell painting, a Western scene of exceptional quality, was preliminarily authenticated at $12 million. Two Maynard Dixon landscapes were valued at $3 million each. A collection of Edward Curtis photographs, original prints signed by the artist, another $4 million. Native American artifacts that, while legally complicated to sell, were historically priceless. But the most significant discovery came near the end of their initial assessment. In a climate-controlled cabinet marked only with Kit Bradford's initials, they found a cache of paintings by an artist whose signature Marcus recognized even with his limited art knowledge, Georgia O'Keeffe. The authentication process for these took longer, requiring experts to fly in from New York and Santa Fe. But when the final assessment came, it took Marcus's breath away. 9 original O'Keeffe paintings, completed between 1925 and 1935, several from her most celebrated New Mexico period, collectively valued at over $300 million. With the aircraft included, the total value of what Marcus had bought for $950 exceeded $450 million. The number was incomprehensible. Marcus sat in the Hangar office, Daniel asleep in his loft, and tried to process what this meant. They weren't just financially stable. They were wealthy beyond any definition of the word. Daniel would never worry about money. Marcus could quit all 3 of his part-time jobs. They could buy any house, live anywhere, do anything. But with the realization came a new terror. News of the discovery would spread. They were already dealing with trespassers and unwanted attention over the aircraft. When the art collection became public knowledge, their modest security would be laughably inadequate. They'd become targets, not just for theft but for litigation, for distant Bradford relatives claiming ownership, for the government questioning whether such valuable Native American artifacts should be in private hands. Janet recognized his panic. "Marcus, you need to make some decisions, and quickly. The authentication team is professional, but word will get out. You need legal representation, serious security, and a clear plan for what you're going to do with this collection." "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his voice hollow. "A month ago, I was worried about heating this place. Now, I'm supposed to figure out what to do with $500 million in art. You don't have to decide everything tonight, but you do need to protect what you have while you figure it out. I can connect you with people who specialize in this, lawyers who handle major estate discoveries, security firms that protect high-value collections. Will you let me help?" Marcus looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully, unaware of how drastically their lives were about to change. "Yes, but Janet, I need you to understand something. I didn't buy this hangar to get rich. I bought it because we had nowhere else to go. Whatever we decide to do with this collection, it has to honor that. It has to mean something beyond just selling to the highest bidder." The next few weeks moved with terrifying speed. Lawyers descended, contracts were signed, security personnel took up residence on the property. The collection was officially documented, authenticated, and insured for an astronomical amount. And despite everyone's best efforts, word leaked. The media storm was instantaneous and overwhelming. Homeless, father and son, discover $450 million art collection, read one headline. From eviction to fortune. The hangar that changed everything, declared another. Television crews camped outside their gate. Marcus's phone rang constantly with offers, interview requests, and investment pitches. Thomas Whitmore called again, his voice now stripped of false friendliness. "I want you to know I'm pursuing legal action, Mr. Chen. When I bid on that hangar, it was with the understanding that it contained only the building and land. This discovery represents fraud on the part of the auction house and potentially yourself." The auction listing said, "Sold as is, contents included," Marcus replied, and his lawyer on the line to witness the call. "I bought the property in good faith with no knowledge of what was inside. Your legal action will fail. We'll see about that. Enjoy your 15 minutes, Mr. Chen. People like you don't hold on to wealth. You'll squander it and end up exactly where you started." The venom in Whitmore's voice revealed something Marcus had been slow to recognize. His success was threatening to people who'd built their self-worth on being better than others. They needed him to fail to validate their own worldview. The attacks came from multiple directions. Distant Bradford relatives emerged, claiming Eleanor had no right to leave the collection in the hangar, that it should have been distributed among family. Native American advocacy groups questioned the legality of Kit Bradford's acquisition of certain artifacts. Tax authorities scrutinized every aspect of the discovery. Most painful were the personal attacks. Articles appeared questioning Marcus's fitness as a father, suggesting he'd exploited his son's tragedy for financial gain. Former neighbors gave interviews, painting him as an irresponsible dreamer who'd gotten lucky. Even his own mother, in a moment of anger during yet another argument about his choices, said publicly that success hasn't changed Marcus's fundamental problems with judgment. Daniel heard and saw everything. Kids at school suddenly wanted to be his friend, not out of genuine affection, but fascinated by his family's newfound wealth. Teachers treated him differently, either with awkward deference or suspicious judgment. The school counselor, Miss Patterson, actually apologized to Marcus, her earlier concerns conveniently forgotten now that his financial situation had changed. One evening, Marcus found Daniel crying in his loft. "Hey buddy, what's wrong?" "Everyone's different now," Daniel said through his tears. "Before, they thought we were poor and weird. Now they think we're rich and weird. Nobody just sees us." Marcus climbed up beside his son, his heart breaking at the wisdom in those words. "Your mum used to say something that I think applies here. She said that how people treat you says more about them than about you. The kids who weren't nice when we had nothing, and are nice now that we have everything, they're showing you who they really are. But what do? We stay true to who we were before any of this happened. We remember that 3 months ago, we were the same people, just without anyone knowing what was in our hangar. The discovery didn't change us. It just changed what others can see." The conversation clarified Marcus's thinking about what to do with the collection. Over the following weeks, working with Janet Morrison and a team of advisors, he developed a plan that honored both Kit Bradford's legacy and his own family's journey. The 9 O'Keeffe paintings would be donated to a new museum, created specifically to house them, the Catherine Bradford Museum of American Art, located in the renovated hangar itself. The building that had sheltered the collection for decades would be transformed into a proper exhibition space, with the story of Kit Bradford's pioneering aviation career integrated into the presentation of her art collection. The Charles Russell and Maynard Dixon paintings would be loaned to museums long-term, their value appreciated by the public rather than hidden in private collections. The Edward Curtis photographs would be digitized and made freely available to Native American tribes, with the physical prints held in trust for cultural preservation. The Native American artifacts posed the most complex ethical questions. After extensive consultation with tribal representatives and legal experts, Marcus established a repatriation program, working to return items to their communities of origin, while funding documentation and preservation efforts. The aircraft would remain on display in the museum, maintained in flying condition, and occasionally flown at air shows to honor Kit Bradford's love of aviation. The financial details were handled through a foundation that would maintain the museum, fund educational programs about aviation and art history, and provide scholarships for children from low-income families. Marcus retained enough to pay off debts, buy a modest house near the hangar, and establish trust funds for Daniel's education. The announcement of these plans brought predictable reactions. Some applauded his generosity. Others called him a fool for giving away such wealth. Whitmore's lawsuit collapsed when Marcus demonstrated his intent to use the collection for public benefit rather than personal enrichment. The Bradford relatives' claims similarly failed when confronted with Eleanor's clear will and Marcus's ethical approach to the discovery. But the most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. The families who'd supported Marcus during his difficult early months at the hangar showed up to help with the museum conversion, donating labor and skills. Local businesses contributed materials, artists and educators volunteered to develop programming. The community that had initially judged Marcus for buying a junkyard now took pride in the cultural institution emerging in their midst, not because they'd been proven wrong, though they had, but because the story Marcus and Daniel represented resonated with everyone who'd ever been underestimated. The museum's opening, scheduled for the anniversary of Marcus's purchase of the hangar, became a major cultural event. Dignitaries attended. Art critics flew in from New York and Los Angeles, but Marcus insisted the first tour go to a group of local school children, including Daniel's classmates. He watched as kids who'd mocked his son for living in a junkyard walked through galleries displaying paintings worth millions, their faces reflecting wonder and new understanding. The collection Kit Bradford had assembled during her revolutionary life was finally being shared, hidden no longer. During his speech at the formal opening ceremony, Marcus spoke not just about the art or the aircraft, but about perception and value. When I bought this hangar for $950, everyone thought I'd made a terrible mistake. They judged the building by its rusted walls and broken roof, never imagining what might lie inside. Kit Bradford faced similar judgment throughout her life. People saw a female pilot at a time when women weren't supposed to fly, never recognizing the brilliant collector and cultural preserver behind the aviator. We live in a world that's quick to judge based on appearances, quick to dismiss what doesn't fit our expectations. This museum exists not just to display art, but to challenge that impulse, to remind us that the most valuable things are often hidden behind unpromising exteriors, that what others dismiss as worthless might contain treasures beyond imagination, that people who look like they're failing might actually be building something extraordinary. He paused, looking out at the audience, finding Daniel in the front row. My son and I came here with nothing but a broken-down car and desperation. People pitied us, mocked us, questioned my fitness as a father. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong to worry. This was a risk, a huge gamble that could have gone terribly wrong. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the only way forward is through the doors everyone else is afraid to open. Sometimes treasure is hidden in the places people are too afraid or too proud to look. And sometimes, when the world has written you off, the best thing you can do is prove not to them, but to yourself that you see value where others see only obstacles. The audience erupted in applause, but Marcus's eyes remained on Daniel, on his son's proud smile. That was the real treasure. Not the O'Keefes or the Russells or the millions of dollars, but the knowledge that they'd faced judgment, survived hardship, and emerged not just intact, but stronger. After the ceremony, Thomas Whitmore approached, his expression difficult to read. Quite a speech, Mr. Chen. Mr. Whitmore. An awkward silence stretched between them before Whitmore spoke again. I want you to know I've withdrawn my lawsuit. Your attorney will receive the paperwork tomorrow. He paused, something like shame crossing his face. I was wrong about you, about what you would do with this discovery. I assumed you'd be like everyone else, that you'd see only the dollar signs. What changed your mind? My daughter. Whitmore's voice softened. She's 12, volunteers at a youth shelter in Spokane. When she heard about your plans for the museum, about the scholarships for kids from difficult circumstances, She said I was being an asshole. Those were her exact words. He laughed without humor. She was right. I've spent my career seeing property as nothing but potential profit. You saw it as potential home, potential treasure, potential service to something larger than yourself. Whitmore extended his hand. I hope you'll accept my apology, and if there's ever anything I can do to support the museum or your foundation, please let me know. After Whitmore left, Marcus stood in the hangar-turned-museum, watching visitors flow through galleries that had once been empty space. The transformation was almost impossible to comprehend, yet it felt inevitable, as though the building had been waiting decades for someone to see its potential. Daniel found him there, as the last visitors were leaving. "Dad!" "Miss Morrison," said Kit Bradford, disappeared, trying to fly around the world. "Do you think she'd be happy with what we did with her collection?" Marcus considered the question. From what he'd learned about Catherine Bradford, she'd been a woman determined to push boundaries, to prove herself in a world that told her she didn't belong. She'd collected art not as investment, but because she recognized beauty and wanted to preserve it. And she died pursuing a dream that others called impossible. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that she'd recognize kindred spirits. We're not pioneers like she was, but we understand what it's like to have people think you're crazy for pursuing something unconventional." "Yeah, buddy, I think she'd be happy." That night, in the modest house they'd bought near the hangar, Marcus and Daniel established a new routine. Before bed, they each shared one thing they were grateful for, a tradition Sarah had started when Daniel was a baby. "I'm grateful we're not sleeping on the floor anymore," Daniel said with the practical honesty of an 8-year-old. Marcus laughed, pulling his son close. "I'm grateful you were brave enough to believe in this place before anyone else did. And I'm grateful your mum taught us both to see the treasure in broken things." In the weeks and months that followed, the museum established itself as a genuine cultural destination. Attendance exceeded projections. Educational programs flourished. The scholarships Marcus had endowed began changing lives. But more significantly, the story of the discovery resonated far beyond Spokane County. Other families facing foreclosure, single parents struggling to provide, children watching their parents sacrifice everything, found inspiration in the proof that hidden treasures existed, that judgment could be wrong, that value didn't depend on external validation. Marcus received letters from across the country, people sharing their own stories of being dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. A single mother working 4 jobs who used the museum's story to teach her kids about perseverance. A recently widowed father learning to raise daughters alone who felt less isolated knowing someone else had walked a similar path. Families who'd lost everything in disasters or economic collapse, finding hope in the message that treasures could still be discovered. The museum created a program called Hidden Treasures, inviting people to share stories of finding value in unexpected places, not art or wealth necessarily, but moments of beauty, grace, or redemption that emerged from difficulty. These stories were collected and displayed alongside Kit Bradford's collection, a testament to the human capacity to recognize worth when the world insisted on worthlessness. 5 years after buying the hangar, Marcus stood with Daniel, now 13, at the grave of Catherine Bradford, recently discovered in a small cemetery in California, where she'd been buried under a different name after her death was finally confirmed. They'd raised money to install a proper memorial, granite engraved with her aviation achievements, and a line from one of her letters, "The sky holds no judgment, only possibility." "Dad," Daniel said, placing flowers on the grave, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd listened to everyone and not bought the hangar?" Marcus thought about that alternate timeline, where he'd accepted Whitmore's first offer or never bid on the property at all. They'd probably be in an apartment somewhere, still struggling, still grieving, still trying to survive day to day without any sense that their circumstances might improve. "I'd rather not know," he admitted, "because then I wouldn't know you were capable of living in a hangar and making it an adventure. I wouldn't know I could take the biggest risk of my life and have it work out. And Kit Bradford's treasures would still be hidden, seen by no one, changing nothing. They stood in silence for a moment before Daniel spoke again. I've been thinking about Mom lately, about how she always saw beauty in broken things. I think she'd say, that's what you did with the hangar, with Kit's collection, with our whole life. You saw beauty where everyone else saw only broken. The observation, startling in its insight, brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Your mom was the one who taught me that, Daniel. Every day we spent together, she showed me how to look past the surface. I just finally learned the lesson. As they walked back to their car, the California sun warm on their shoulders, Marcus reflected on the journey from that desperate morning when he'd read the eviction notice, to this moment of peaceful recognition of everything they'd survived and built. The money mattered, of course, security mattered. But what sustained him was the knowledge that they'd taken the path everyone warned against, and found treasure no one else had vision to seek. The hangar stood now as proof that judgment could be survived, that mockery couldn't diminish true worth, that what the world dismissed as worthless might contain wonders. It stood as Kit Bradford's monument and Marcus's vindication, a place where two stories of defying expectations had merged into something larger than either alone. But most importantly, it stood as a promise to everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong, that they weren't enough, that they should give up on impossible dreams, the promise that treasure existed in unexpected places, that perseverance had value beyond immediate results, that the world's verdict on your worth was never the final word. That night, back home in their house near the museum, Marcus added a new photograph to the wall where pictures of Sarah still held place of honor. It showed him and Daniel on the day they'd first discovered the aircraft, their faces bright with wonder, standing in the hangar that everyone had dismissed as worthless. Beneath it, he wrote a single line, adapted from one of Kit Bradford's letters: "The most valuable treasures are the ones you have to be brave enough to see." The hangar lights clicked off one by one as the museum closed for the first evening. But the building's presence remained, solid and enduring, a testament written in steel and stone to the power of seeing value where others saw only rust. The first anniversary of the museum's opening brought unexpected revelations that would deepen the mystery of Catherine Bradford's legacy even further. Marcus received a call from an elderly woman in Portland, Oregon, who'd seen the museum featured in a documentary about unlikely art discoveries. Mr. Chen. Her voice trembled with age and emotion. "My name is Dorothy Henshaw. I was Catherine Bradford's flight instructor in 1924, and I need to tell you something about Kit that nobody knew." Marcus met Dorothy 2 weeks later in her assisted living facility, a bright room overlooking the Columbia River. She was 97 years old, sharp-minded despite her frail body, and she held a leather-bound journal that she pressed into Marcus's hands with surprising strength. "Kit didn't die in that 1937 flight attempt," Dorothy said, her eyes bright with tears. "She made it to Australia, decided she was tired of being America's sweetheart pilot, tired of the pressure and the expectations. She lived there for another 40 years, under the name Catherine Brennan, married a sheep rancher, had 2 children, painted watercolors, and flew cargo planes during World War II under a different identity." Marcus stared at the journal, his mind reeling. But the memorial, the death certificate, all arranged by Kit herself, with my help, and that of a few others who loved her enough to let her disappear. Dorothy's smile was bittersweet. She wanted peace, Mr. Chen. She wanted to be more than the fearless aviatrix everyone demanded she be. So she gave them a tragic ending, and built a quiet life somewhere they'd never look. The journal contained Kit's own account of her staged disappearance, her life in Australia, and most significantly, detailed records of additional art acquisitions she'd made throughout the 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds, pieces she'd shipped back to the hangar through intermediaries, adding to the collection even after the world believed her dead. There's more, Dorothy continued. Kit kept a second storage room, smaller than the first, accessed through a panel in the hangar's north wall. She told me about it in 1974, made me promise to reveal its existence only when someone worthy finds the first room and chooses to share rather than hoard. She believed that person would know what to do with the rest. Marcus returned to Spokane with Dorothy's journal and a hand-drawn map showing the location of the hidden panel. That evening, with Janet Morrison, Ray the mechanic, and Daniel present as witnesses, they located the panel exactly where Dorothy's map indicated. Behind it lay a narrow passage leading to a space no larger than a walk-in closet, environmentally sealed and containing 12 wooden crates, each labeled with dates spanning from 1942 to 1968. The crates held treasures that made their first discovery seem almost modest by comparison. Kit Bradford, living as Catherine Brennan, had continued her collecting passion with the wisdom of age and the freedom of anonymity. Australian Aboriginal art, some pieces centuries old, collected ethically with proper documentation from artists who'd trusted her. Early works by Aboriginal painters who would later become internationally recognized. Sculptures, ceremonial objects, and paintings that represented not just monetary value, but irreplaceable cultural heritage. Also in the crates were Kit's own paintings, dozens of watercolors and oils she'd created during her 40 years in Australia. They revealed an artist of genuine talent, someone who'd hidden yet another gift beneath the persona of fearless pilot and shrewd collector. Her work captured the Australian landscape with the same passion she'd once brought to flying, each painting signed simply KB with the year. The final crate contained letters, hundreds of them, correspondence between Kit and her sister Eleanor, spanning 4 decades. Reading them, Marcus understood the full scope of Eleanor's sacrifice. She'd known her sister was alive, had helped maintain the fiction of Kit's death, had protected the hangar and its contents for decades, while bearing the judgment of a community that called her strange and reclusive. Eleanor's final letters, written in her 80s, revealed her reasoning for leaving everything to a distant relative she'd never met. "I've watched from afar as Sarah Chen faced tragedy with grace," Eleanor had written. "I've seen how Marcus Chen honors her memory by protecting their son while refusing to surrender to circumstances that would break lesser men. Kit always said the worthiest treasures go to those brave enough to be vulnerable. Marcus Chen has that courage. When he discovers what we've left him, he'll understand what to do with it, not because he needs the wealth, but because he understands what it means to be dismissed by a world that judges only by appearances." Marcus sat in the hidden room, surrounded by Kit Bradford's secret life, and wept, not from the overwhelming value of this second discovery, though preliminary estimates suggested another $200 million in cultural treasures, but from the profound responsibility Eleanor and Kit had entrusted to him across decades and death. "Dad?" Daniel's voice was soft, uncertain. "Are you okay?" Marcus pulled his son close, this boy who'd become wise beyond his years through necessity and circumstance. "I'm overwhelmed, buddy. These 2 women, Kit and Eleanor, they spent their entire lives being judged and dismissed, and they decided we were worthy of their legacy. That's a lot to live up to." Over the following months, Marcus worked with Indigenous Australian representatives, art historians, and cultural preservation experts to handle the second collection responsibly. The Aboriginal art, after extensive consultation with traditional owners and communities, was split between repatriation to Australia and a rotating exhibit at the museum that would educate American audiences about Aboriginal culture while respecting protocols and sacred knowledge. Kit Bradford's own paintings were authenticated, studied, and ultimately exhibited as the work of a pioneering woman who'd mastered multiple forms of expression, aviation, art collecting, and fine art itself. Critics were stunned by the quality of her work. several pieces comparing favorably to recognized Australian masters of the same period. The letters between Kit and Eleanor became the foundation for a new permanent exhibit called Hidden Lives, exploring the ways both women had navigated a world hostile to female independence and unconventional choices. The exhibit resonated powerfully with visitors, particularly women who saw their own struggles reflected in the sisters' story of courage and sacrifice. Dorothy Henshaw visited the museum 6 months after her revelation, frail but determined to see Kit's full legacy displayed. Marcus wheeled her through the galleries, watching her face transform as she encountered her friend's life, work properly honored at last. She would have loved this, Dorothy whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Not the fame, she fled from that, but the understanding, the recognition that her life meant more than one dramatic arc, that she could be pilot and artist, adventurer and mother, public figure and private person, that she contained multitudes. At the Aboriginal art exhibit, Dorothy stopped for long minutes before a painting, a sweeping landscape of red earth and impossible sky. Kit painted this in 1956, she said softly. She sent me a photograph of it with a letter saying she'd finally found peace, not in the sky she'd conquered, but in the earth she'd learned to see with new eyes. Daniel, now 14 and volunteering regularly at the museum as a docent, joined them. He'd grown tall in the past year, his voice deepening, his understanding of the world expanding through daily exposure to visitors' reactions to the collection. "Mrs. Henshaw," he asked with the earnest curiosity that made him an excellent guide, "why do you think Kit chose to disappear instead of just retiring? Couldn't she have stayed in America and just stopped flying?" Dorothy considered the question with the gravity it deserved. In 1937, women who accomplished what Kit had didn't get to retire. Dear boy, they got to be symbols. Frozen at their moment of greatest achievement. Expected to inspire forever, without being allowed to grow or change or fail. Kit loved flying, but she loved being fully human more. Disappearing was the only way she could choose her own ending instead of letting the world write it for her. The conversation stayed with Marcus long after Dorothy returned to Portland. He recognized in Kit's choice a reflection of his own struggle, the pressure to be a certain kind of father, to make decisions others approved of, to fit into boxes that had never been designed for people like him. The hangar had given him the freedom to choose his own path, just as Australia had given Kit the same gift. That freedom, Marcus realized, was the true treasure. The art, the aircraft, the monetary value, all of it mattered less than the permission Kit and Eleanor had granted through their example to live authentically despite judgment. The museum's second anniversary brought another surprise. A visitor who introduced herself as Margaret Brennan, Kit Bradford's daughter, now in her 70s, and traveling from Sydney specifically to see her mother's legacy. Marcus invited her to the house, and they spent an entire evening in conversation. While Daniel listened with rapt attention, Margaret shared stories of growing up with a mother who flew cargo planes during the war, who painted every evening, who never spoke of her famous past but lived with a quiet intensity that suggested depth beyond the ordinary. "I didn't know who she'd been until I was 35, Margaret explained. Found documents after she died in 1977, old newspaper clippings hidden in her studio. By then, I'd built my own life as a flight instructor, following her example without knowing the full story. When I confronted my father about the deception, he said Mom had made him promise never to reveal her past. She wanted to be remembered for who she was, not who she'd been." Margaret pulled out photographs, images of Kit in her 60s and 70s, white-haired and sun-weathered, standing beside small aircraft, with the same confident smile that appeared in pictures from her youth. Other photos showed her painting in her studio, the Australian landscape, visible through windows, her expression one of complete absorption. She was happy, Margaret said simply. Maybe that's the most important thing to know. She gave up fame and chose happiness. The world called her dead, and she lived more fully than most people ever do. Before leaving, Margaret donated the photographs and several of Kit's personal items to the museum. Her flight goggles from Australia, paintbrushes worn to nubs, a journal from her final years filled with observations about light and color, and the eternal challenge of capturing truth on canvas. The additions deepened the museum's narrative, transforming it from a story of discovered treasure into something more profound, a meditation on identity, choice, and the courage required to define yourself against the world's expectations. Daniel, increasingly involved in the museum's educational programming, developed a school curriculum based on Kit's life called Hidden Treasures Within. It encouraged students to identify gifts or passions they'd hidden due to fear of judgment, to consider how societal expectations might be limiting their potential, to imagine what treasures might be revealed if they chose authenticity over approval. The program proved remarkably successful, resonating with teenagers navigating their own struggles with identity and belonging. Teachers reported students opening up about artistic talents they'd hidden, academic interests they'd dismissed as impractical, aspects of themselves they'd suppressed to fit in. Kit Bradford's story, it turned out, wasn't just about art or aviation. It was about the universal human struggle to be seen fully and accepted completely. Marcus watched his son lead these discussions with pride that sometimes overwhelmed him. Daniel had transformed from the frightened 8-year-old sleeping on a hangar floor into a thoughtful young man who understood that their journey from eviction to fortune, from judgment to vindication, contained lessons worth sharing. 5 years after the museum's opening, Marcus was invited to speak at a conference on unexpected wealth and its psychological impacts. He stood before an audience of lottery winners, inheritance recipients, and others whose lives had been transformed by sudden fortune, and shared what he'd learned. "The money changed our circumstances," he said, "but it didn't change who we were." That's the part people misunderstand. They think wealth transforms you into someone different, but what it actually does is reveal who you've always been. If you were generous when poor, you'll be generous when wealthy. If you were bitter when struggling, you'll be bitter when comfortable. The treasure doesn't define you, your response to it does. He paused, looking out at faces reflecting his own earlier confusion and overwhelm. Kit Bradford discovered that the hard way. She achieved her dreams, became exactly what she'd worked for, and found that external success couldn't give her internal peace. So she walked away from everything the world valued to claim something more precious, the right to be fully herself, contradictions and all. After the speech, a young woman approached him, tears streaming down her face. "My mother died 6 months ago," she said. "Left me her house, which turned out to contain a collection of rare books worth $3 million. Everyone tells me I'm lucky, but I feel guilty, like I don't deserve it, like I should have done something to earn it." Marcus recognized the emotion immediately. The same guilt he'd felt when the collection's value was revealed, the sense that he hadn't worked hard enough for such fortune. "Your mother chose you," he said gently. "Not randomly, but deliberately. She trusted you with her legacy because she saw in you something worthy of that trust. The question isn't whether you deserve it, that's already been answered. The question is what you'll do with it now that honors both her and yourself." The conversation reminded Marcus of Eleanor's letters, of her careful observation of his life before making her decision. These women, Eleanor, Kit, even Sarah in her own way, had all understood something profound about legacy. It wasn't about leaving things to people. It was about recognizing in others the capacity to transform what they received into something meaningful. Back home in Spokane, the museum continued to evolve and expand. The collection attracted scholars from around the world, generating research and publications that deepened understanding of American art, aviation history, and cross-cultural collecting. Educational programs reached thousands of students annually. The scholarship fund Marcus had established was sending dozens of young people to college each year, many of them first-generation students who'd grown up in circumstances similar to his own. But the most profound impact remained personal and local. Families visited the museum and saw their own struggles reflected in Kit and Eleanor's story of perseverance against judgment. Single parents found encouragement in Marcus's example. Children learned that treasure came in forms beyond money: courage, authenticity, the willingness to see value where others saw only obstacles. On quiet evenings, Marcus still walked through the hangar-turned-museum alone, running his hands along walls that had once seemed only broken and ugly. He thought about the journey from that desperate morning, reading an eviction notice, to this moment of purpose and peace. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved every impossible turn their story had taken. And he thought about Kit Bradford, painting in her Australian studio, finally free to be all the things she'd contained: pilot, artist, collector, mother, adventurer, ordinary woman living an extraordinary life on her own terms. The hangar stood as monument to all of them. Kit, who'd hidden her treasures and herself, waiting for a world worthy of both. Eleanor, who'd guarded her sister's secrets while enduring a lifetime of dismissal. Sarah, who'd taught Marcus to see beauty in broken things. And Marcus himself, who'd been brave enough or desperate enough to open doors everyone else feared, discovering that sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones you have to risk everything to find. Daniel found his father there one evening, standing in the central gallery as twilight painted the space in shades of gold and amber. At 17 now, preparing for college, Daniel had grown into someone who understood the responsibility of their legacy. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about my college essay. They want me to write about a transformative experience, but I don't know how to explain all of this. The hangar, the discovery, what it meant without sounding like I'm bragging." Marcus smiled, recognizing his son's struggle to articulate what they'd lived. "Tell them about the first night we slept here, about being cold and scared and not knowing if we'd made a terrible mistake. Tell them about being mocked and judged and questioned. Then tell them about choosing to see possibility anyway, about trusting that broken things might contain beauty. The treasure is a good story, but the transformation happened before we ever found it." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "It's not about what we discovered. It's about who we became in the discovering." Exactly. As father and son stood together in the museum they'd built from ruin and risk, Marcus felt the presence of all the women who'd made this moment possible. Kit, Eleanor, Sarah, 3 women who'd refused to accept the world's verdict on their worth, who'd hidden treasures and themselves, until someone brave enough came along to see beyond surfaces, to the value beneath. The hangar breathed around them, alive with their stories, proof that judgment could be survived, that mockery couldn't diminish true worth, that what the world dismissed as worthless might contain wonders beyond imagination. And in that breathing space between past and future, Marcus understood the final truth Eleanor and Kit had wanted him to learn. The greatest treasure wasn't the art or the wealth, or even vindication of being proven right. It was the courage to claim your own story, to see yourself clearly despite the world's distorted mirror, to believe in your worth even when no one else could see it. That courage, passed from Kit to Eleanor to Sarah to Marcus to Daniel, was the real inheritance. Everything else was just the proof that such courage mattered, that faith in unseen value wasn't foolishness but vision, and that sometimes, when you're brave enough to open the doors everyone else fears, you discover not just treasure but yourself. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.